obedience the prerequisite for progress? We all want to grow up in God. We want to move forward in Him. We don't want to stay children. We want to grow up in all things. And so there is a prerequisite for any forward motion in maturity, and that is obedience. A few weeks ago, I taught on relearning to trust. And I pointed out that all of us begin our lives with absolute trust. Though helpless, we trusted our parents for everything. I encourage you to get online and listen to it, because this is the very next part of trust. And I used a demonstration of a fearless flight of a young child in order to show that every young child totally trusts their parents. They only learn to not trust by being dropped. This is my precious little granddaughter, Maya. Can you wave? Wave like that. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, this is her dad, John. And because I trust John with Maya more than I trust myself, I'm going to allow him to demonstrate. The thing is, do you like to fly, Maya? Do you like to go up? Look that way. Yeah, there. Whoa! 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 Amazing! This feeling of security and absolute trust from a loving parent is something that we all yearn for. Sadly, the peace and security that our childlike trust had brought us very soon begins to be eroded, because we find in this world we are dropped at times. As children, we're born with trust, and we learn to distrust. Thankfully, God, who is trustworthy, allows us, His children, to again experience and bask in the security of His care. How many of you are trusting God for your security, even in troubled times? Although children are born with trust, they need to be taught to obey. It does not come natural. How many of you have had children that you are raising or are in the process of raising? Put your hand up. And keep your hand up a sec. If your children naturally obey all the time, then you can put your hand down. You can put it down now. I have found that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And only, dare I say, the rod of correction, there is a requirement to make sure that you, as the parent, say, in this house, you will obey. This is not negotiable. And if you do not obey, there is something that you are going to find that this friend of a parent turns into someone that you consider an enemy. Because I'm standing in between you and hell. And I'm going to break your huge will. And the way we do it is not much different than trying to train a dog to make sure he pees on the right place. Take a little, wrap up a little paper and hit him on the nose. But we don't do that. We practice what the Bible says, to lay hands on them appropriately. Bottom end. There's a place, time and a place for everything. And when rebellion happens, there's a time and a place. And it's get in the bathroom, son. You're going to find out who's boss. Of course, loving, never in anger. That being said, today we're going to look at the first lesson that we, God's children, need to learn to successfully progress in life, and that's to obey. And that's why I have entitled this message, Obedience, the prerequisite for progress. We all want to grow up in God. We want to move forward in Him. We don't want to stay children. We want to grow up in all things. And so there is a prerequisite for any forward motion in maturity, and that is obedience. And for those of you who don't know what the definition of prerequisite is, it is something that is required as a prior condition for something to happen or exist. The last time we did the sermon on trust, we sang that familiar song that I learned as a little child. When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. When we do His good will, He abides with us still. And to all who will trust and obey. Nice and loud now. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Oh, good. Did you hear in that song a prerequisite stated? Did you hear that there is a way forward, and it requires us to not only trust the one who has given us life, but also to obey the commands that He gives us. For all of His commands are good and true and righteous. The first point I would like to make is that both trust and obey are yes or no positions. To help you understand what I'm saying is either you trust someone or you mistrust them. If you say, well, I don't totally trust them, well, then there's some mistrust, right? It's either you do trust them in the position or what you are asking them to do. Okay, like for instance, I trust the mailman to, when I put something in the mailbox, I trust them in their position to deliver that over to the place I'm addressing it to. So there is categories of areas of trust. Either you obey a directive or you disobeyed. It's a yes or no. This is not maybe I sort of did. And you know, that's the sad thing. We as humans who have a strong will and a position and a perspective, which we talked about last time, we sometimes think, well, yeah, I can go so far, but not totally obey. Do you know that actually got them into trouble in the Garden of Eden, right? You know, it says don't eat of the tree, but they go and they sort of do things, but bottom line is they disobeyed, and the consequences were great. So trust is a yes or no. Either you do or you don't. And the same is with obedience. Now, last week, Jesse Meerman gave us a historical walk through the Old Testament and look at the life of Saul. How many of you thought it really fascinating and learned some things last week? I did. I thought you did a great job, Jesse. He didn't know that I was going to be speaking, continuing on, but the Holy Spirit did. So let's continue at 1 Samuel 15, 7 through 24. And this is, of course, after Samuel the prophet had given very clear instructions to King Saul to destroy and wipe out the Amalekites, which were in the land of Canaan, which God had given to Israel. And I will say, this is Old Testament, and I thank God we're not in this mode anymore. And it was a brutal time back then. You know, they were fighting for their existence. And I don't have to make a defense for what God chose to do back then. But I can give a report of what happened and the lessons that we can glean from having looked at these stories in the Old Testament and what God had asked them to do. So, though Saul had been told by Samuel that these Amalekites had to be destroyed. He didn't necessarily do it. So we're beginning here on verse 7. So Paul defeated the Amalekites. Okay, it's done, right? But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen and the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly. Samuel had told them to destroy them utterly. But they thought in their position, I don't know if that's a good idea. Well, we see some problems already. But everything despised and worthless, they utterly destroyed. They understood. That made sense to them. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. He disobeyed. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night. Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. And it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself. They turned and proceeded on to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, now this is the guy who was in charge, large and in charge, head and shoulders above everyone else. He was a big guy, all right? And he comes out to Samuel, who had given him the instructions, and thinks he's done a great job. And he said, blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. But Samuel said, what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen which I hear? And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, wait, and let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said to him, speak. Samuel said, it is not true. Though you were little in your own eyes, you were made the head of the tribes of Israel. And the Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are exterminated, totally removed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoils and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord? Then Saul said to Samuel, I did obey the voice of the Lord and went on the mission on which the Lord sent me and have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. I did it. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the choicest of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Now all of a sudden he's hedging. You know what? It's very difficult when you're not telling the truth, when you're not obeying. You start changing the story. First of all, he said he did it. Now he's blaming it on the people. Have you ever seen that happen in real life? Maybe in your family. Little kids. Oh, he did it. And you go, and you look at their manipulation, and I'm going to give you a little parenting advice right now. Though you see their clever manipulation and their creative storytelling, which they know is eventually going to be found out, do not snicker, do not laugh, do not let them think for a moment that their cleverness and naughtiness is funny. Can I have an amen from anybody? I have seen it. I myself have actually been shocked and found myself laughing in disbelief. Like, what did you just say? When it's ruined on the floor, it's obvious their hands, they have it on their hands, and they're saying they didn't do it. I mean, literally the gall. But the sad thing is, we don't have to put up with, and God thinks this is a serious matter when we disobey. It is the root of all the destruction that would sabotage those little lives. Make sure you let them see, wow, that is not okay. I don't punish kids for making a mistake, dropping and breaking the best vase that was been. You might cry inside, but you do not discipline a child for mistakes or spilled milk. You discipline a child for rebellion and disrespect. For those are the things that will send them on a trajectory that you as a parent do not want to have your child deal with. Back to this. But the people took some of the spoils, sheep and oxen, and the choicest of things devoted for destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. And Samuel said, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offering and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, or look, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For, brace yourselves, this is serious. For rebellion is as the sin of divination. In other translation, that's witchcraft. Amen. That is human control. Witchcraft is using resources, tapping into whatever's available out there under your control, and it's about manipulation. And so, for rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination as iniquity and idolatry. You are serving a different God. You're serving the God of self when you are insubordinate to what God says. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you from being king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. Yeah, sure. I have indeed transgressed the command of the Lord in your words, because I feared the people and listened to their voices. See, here he is blaming it on someone else again. It's the woman you gave me, I think Adam said. Right? And, you know, in some ways, he's blaming God because God was the one who gave him his wife. Right? Obedience is choosing to trust or submit to the legitimate authority in our life. I'm going to say that again. Obedience is choosing to trust or submit to the legitimate authority in our life. Disobeying legitimate authority is rebellion, and the consequences can be devastating. In King Saul's life, it cost him his throne. It cost him God's blessing. The Spirit of God, which had been with him because he was with God, left him. And it even cost him eventually his sanity. Ephesians 6, 1-3 says, children, and I want all little kids' eyes, look at me right now. I'm talking to you. This is all the other parents, they're just going, okay, Pastor Cal is talking to our kids. And I'm giving you a directive. And this is a directive from the New Testament that is a directive from the Old Testament. So this is 3 layers deep. But bottom line, in back of it, it is God. And it's the only place of the commandments that it's the first one that he says, if you do this, kids, your life will go well. You will progress in life and it will be good. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. So this is a wonderful thing. This isn't like, oh, poor me, I have to obey my parents. This is something that if you do this, you will experience God's blessing in your life. The first thing we should teach our children is obedience. Don't touch the stove. Don't play with matches or electrical outlets and don't go in the street. Later, you can explain the reasons why. Now, I've told this story before, but it is indelibly marked upon my consciousness. When my son Derek was very young, I had walked across the street. Baldwin is where I lived on. And that street didn't have the stoplight there. It just raced in front of my house. And I had walked all the way across to the neighbor's house and talking to him. And as I'm talking to him for a while, I turned around and saw my little son Derek, could not really understand English well, but he could walk, all right? He understood, Daddy's over there, and he started running toward me, and I'm on this side of the fast road, and he's running toward me. And I said, stop, go back. I didn't have time to say, the reasons are is because the cars are going this fast, and if you get run over, there's a possibility you might be maimed or injured or killed. I mean, that wasn't part of the long discussion. Stop! And I, as a father in loving, I ran as fast as I could and caught him as he was running as fast as he could to me, full speed in the middle of Baldwin. I didn't look for cars. I just ran. I grabbed my son and dove, just missing being hit by a car, rolling with a good Vietnam roll, came up. Back then, I could do it better without injury myself. But I tell you what, obedience is, it's essential that you learn even before you understand why. It's also the first thing that new recruits in the military are taught. You need to be able to obey. A soldier who does not obey instructions will endanger himself, his fellow soldiers, and he is not fit to serve. He is a liability and will be dismissed. You do not go forward in life in any area if you don't learn to obey. And I tell you what, those sergeants don't necessarily tell you why you're doing what you're doing. Do I have any vets who will say an amen to that? But did you get some benefit out of learning the discipline to obey? On the battlefield, in time of war, it's very important that when the commands are given, that they work as one unit. Otherwise, everyone does what's right in their own eyes, and I tell you what, it's chaos and sure defeat. At times, we do not feel like obeying. But if we do what we are asked to do, there is a reward, even if you did not feel like it. Matthew 21, 28 through 31. It says, what do you think? And this is Jesus telling us a parable. A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, Son, go work today in the vineyard. And the son answered, I will not. Whoa. But afterwards he regretted it and went and worked. The second man, the man came to the second son and said the same thing. And this son answered, I will, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of the Father? The son that said he would not do it, but then thought better about it and actually did it. That is the one that obeyed. And what this verse shows us, that it's considered a credit of having done it if you obey. Now, it's true, his attitude needs to be adjusted. But at least, if you don't even feel like doing what's right, and do what's right, God considers that a win. Because do you know what? Since when do feelings have much to do with what we do? Now, I will say he was disrespectful, and I'm sure God brought that man around in time. This is the second point. Obedience is the path to promotion. Your desire to grow in God or progress in life begins with humbly submitting to the authorities he, that is God, has placed in your life. Obedience is yielding to God's authority, even when we don't understand why. Obedience is a yes or no thing. I will tell you, God, the captain of the Lord's host, needs an army of believers who are willing to do what he says. Then he can give us commission, and he will promote you because he is for you. He wants you to grow up in all things. Our faith will grow as we start obeying the promptings of the Holy Spirit. As we learn to do what he says, we are given greater authority. You want authority in God? Start obeying the still small voice. And you, not only that, is you will be used mightily. Because God can give you the most menial tasks. I love the little stories that I hear from you where you obeyed God and maybe said a word to someone or did something for somebody. All of those things, being faithful in small things, sets you up in the queue for greater things. God looks at the resume of the obedient, and those are the ones he says, I'm going to use that one. You've been faithful in small things, I will use you in big things. He's not looking for the most flamboyant or the most obvious, the one who can speak the best. In fact, he actually says he uses the weak so that he might be seen and his glory might be seen. But that only happens as we obey his voice. Divine authority is not about being in control. It's about being under God's control. Jesus could identify with us as he struggled to make the hard decisions to obey his Father. At the time where his death was imminent, he agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane with the personal cost he would have to pay to obey. But it says in Matthew 26, 38 through 39, then he said to them, this is in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he was agonizing, wrestling with what God the Father had sent him to do, his commission. He said to them, my soul is consumed with sorrow to the point of death. And he said to his disciples, stay here and keep watch with me. And Jesus, going a little farther, he fell face down and prayed, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but as you will. The result of this was our salvation. We can rejoice in that. He loved you, and he was willing to do that. In Philippians 2, 5 through 13, it speaks of Christ's willingness to do what he didn't feel like doing, but the value in what happened in obeying the Father. And he challenges us, the Apostle Paul challenges us to have the same attitude as we want to progress in God. He says, have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped or hung on to, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of man, like you and I, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself to become, let's say that word together, obedient. Jesus became obedient? Yes. Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient even to the point of death, even death on the cross. He had already learned obedience when he obeyed his parents as a young child. Even when he knew that he had a call and he was in the temple at 12 years old, when his parents came and said, son, you might be teaching all the scribes and Pharisees, and I know you I'm glad you know what you're called to do, but we're going home now, son. So Jesus, come here. And Jesus went home with his parents because in all ways Jesus learned humility and to obey. Let's go on with that scripture verse. What is the outcome? For this reason also, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow to those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. He did this in submission to God for God's glory. What was the outcome? So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed. Now that's speaking to the Philippians here. Apostle Paul says, you know what? Everything I've seen about you, you're obedient. Just as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Third point, we never stop learning to obey. You know, you may be envious of those who seem to have great authority, and they gained that simply by obeying. They were not anything special about them, but somehow they have been given authority. And all they are doing is obeying God, doing what God told them to do. You may be tempted to be envious of that. And though they appear to have a lot of control, they are and will always be students in God's obedience school. In Exodus, God commanded Moses, who was the leader of the Israelites. He commanded him to, after the Israelites complained that they had no water. And they said, what do we do, Moses? What do we do? Well, Moses appealed to God, and God said to him in Exodus 17, verse 6, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock of Horeb. This is God speaking. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it. Can you imagine Moses, this guy in front of all these people, thirsty, and he's obeying God and walks in front of this big rock, takes his staff, his stick, and strikes it, and all the people will drink. And Moses did so. He obeyed in the sight of the elders of Israel. And the water came out. It was an awesome thing. What an amazing miracle. Pretty awesome. A great miracle. Wouldn't you like to have been there? Simply by obeying God's command. Well, let's read the next time that happened. Numbers 20, 8 through 11. Again, they come grumbling to Moses. We need water. And God gives him some instruction. Take the staff and assemble the congregation. You and Aaron and your brother. Now there's 3 people there. All right? God's given instruction. It's just not Moses now. It's 3 people. And tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. In other words, God told him to speak to the rock and water would come out. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give them drink to the congregation and to their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. Bam! Bam! And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. Wow, another awesome miracle. You know, you're pretty cool there, Moses. Let's keep reading. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. In other words, this was about you, Moses. It wasn't pointing, bringing glory to God. Therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given you. Moses, the man who took the children of Israel out of Egypt to deliver them to Canaan, because he disobeyed, because God said, I want you this time to speak to the rock. He simply added his little flourish of himself in there. Isn't that sort of severe? Because of that, God wouldn't even let him go into Canaan. Everyone else could go, who later on following Joshua, but he was not allowed. Why was the punishment so harsh? It seemed like such a small infraction because Moses disobeyed what God told him. Moses took control. Although authority comes as a result of obeying God's direction, it is not so we can be in control, but so that we will more faithfully remain under his control. I tell you what, it's a hard thing because the school of God escalates the tests. It gets more difficult, and he expects you to be more explicit and do exactly what he says. When you were a child, you got away with, I would like to say, I won't say, you got away with a lot of things, let's say. But now that you become older in God and have learned the elementary classes of obedience, God expects you to be more responsible, more under his control, more doing only what he says for you to do. And if you do that, he will elevate you and give you, when I say elevate you, in man's eyes, you will be given authority. And the response is wonderful. You can say things because God told you to say things, and amazing things happen. You are a miracle waiting to happen as you walk around because you have learned to do and say what God told you to do. But at the same time, the higher degree of authority he gives you, the more he expects you to be clear that it's God, not you, and only say what God tells you to say. If you fail, God gives you an adult-sized punishment. Did Moses go to heaven? Yes. He just didn't go to Canaan. All right? Do you understand what we just talked about? In conclusion, this message, which calls for us to surrender our will to God and obey him completely, is and will be summarily rejected by the majority of the world, but it is still the truth. It is the gospel truth. Obedience to God will always be the prerequisite for any progress of mankind. Like foolish puppets, we long to be free quite often. And in doing so, we lay helpless and crippled after cutting our own strings to the Creator who gives us direction and movement. Don't be like that marionette that foolishly says, I don't need the man above. For we are his workmanship and directed by him. The heart of man tends toward rebellion against God. Rebellion against the only one that can give him life. The other day, I spent an evening at a coffee house downtown that had an open mic that I frequent many times in my life. It's a gathering for local poets and musicians as they share their musings, their poems, and songs. I have to say, the sadness and pent-up anger against all that is sacred broke my heart this past Thursday. The raucous rantings against any authority that would call them to submit or obey including God himself, was shocking and vulgar. A room where the person who is, I have to be careful, who knew better, theology, was led in chants of, "Hail Satan!" And many in the room had their hands raised as they chanted over and over again that. Later in the night, another person, while playing drums, shouting his angst at the world, which is pent up inside of the generation that we, the younger generation, the Z generation, and many millennials, the angst and rebellion against all that is normal or any absolute was palpable. I could not imagine as they said, F, the word you after that, my parents. And they chanted it with hands raised. The same word, my mother, my father, my aunt, my grandma, and God himself. My heart sank. With great despair of soul, I leaned over and looked at the couples that were of the same gender who I'd been talking to, because I expect them to be who they are. And I love them who they are. And they know it. I interact with such crowds. I go down there and spend time with them, and we talk about life. I don't preach at them, except for I get them smiling and knowing I love them first. But all of this unbelievable dysfunction and confusion escalated to the point where a song was sung and they cheered about someone blowing their head off with a gun in his mouth. Every time it got to that point, they'd go, yeah. Such angst. And finally, my time was up, and I walked to the front. And I picked up a guitar and a harmonica, and I said, I'm going to bring this down to a little bit of softness right here. And I said, somebody's praying. Somebody's praying for me. I'm so glad that I would have lost hope. The words were about somebody's praying. And after that, I said a poem that I had written in the flavor that they are used to communicating in the mic with great exuberance about God's return and how he has revealed himself to me. Then sang my testimony song with the harmonica, a little bluesy kind of stuff, and they get into that. They'll respect you if you listen to them. They'll listen to you. If you aren't willing to sit down and put all your offense aside, they're taking the Lord's name in vain. It's not the Lord's name to them. They don't know him. I would expect them to be profane in my book. But I sit and listen. Do you know God doesn't they took my name in vain. Now, if you do it, brothers, I'll back away. Don't do it. I'll rebuke you if I hear you use vulgar, profane language against God. But to them, as I listened to them, and then I shared my experience, my song of deliverance and freedom, and then at the end I said this: I have looked within, and I have found only darkness. There was no answers within, but then I looked up to him, and God revealed himself to me, and he accepted me and gave me life. I am a happy man. I may be old, but I'm a happy man, and I rejoice. I could exult in the God of my salvation. And I spoke a poem about the way I can communicate to God in a way that they are looking like he's talking to somebody, and somehow there's peace and joy. And as I left and walked to my seat, someone reached out and says, that was the best of the night. The thing is, we have light. And we are powerful in God. You are, when you step up and do what God tells you to do. Romans 6, verse 16 and 18. Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey? Whether you are a slave of sin, which leads to death, which we see all around us, or obedience to God, which leads to righteousness. But thanks be to God that though you used to be slaves of sin, I don't know about you, but I did. You have come to obey from your heart the pattern of teaching that has now claimed your allegiance. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves of righteousness. Obedience to Christ is true freedom. Call me a slave, but a slave of a God who loves me and treats me as a son. Jesus made this clear in John 15, verse 14. You are my friends if you do what I command. And if freedom isn't enough, it's also friendship with God. I challenge you, my brothers and sisters, to begin to obey. Put down flesh, every thought that challenges the truth of God. You don't need an explanation. You need to submit to His will. And if you do, He will give you peace and security. And you can, with me, rejoice in the God of our salvation. Would you stand up? If you have never submitted to God and asked Him to be Lord of your life, I challenge you to make a step of obedience and walk to the front and say, God, I need you. If you are living in rebellion in areas of your life, disobedience to Him, I challenge you, let it go. Do whatever is necessary in your life to cut off your means of disobedience. Lay aside every sin that easily besets you and start obeying God, and the blessing of God will flow and you'll be used. All right, Lord, in Jesus' name, I pray a blessing on this group of people as they follow you. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause His face to shine upon you and give you His peace.
I hope you've enjoyed this. To hear other messages by Calvin Bergsma, go to facebook.com/GCF Church or youtube.com/GCF Messages. You may also follow Georgetown Christian Fellowship with our app. Go to either iOS or the Play Store for Android and search for Word Server. That's one word, Word Server, and install the free application. There you will get all of our messages, including streaming capability.